After 3 years of silence, my son Milton's voice came through the phone, inviting me to California to mend things. But when I arrived, what welcomed me was an empty house and a neighbor's desperate warning about the slaps he'd seen. He didn't know that a mother's faith is stronger than concrete walls, and I was about to uncover the truth buried inside. Have you ever loved someone so much that you were willing to ignore every single warning sign just to hold on to the smallest sliver of hope? A mother's love is like that sometimes. It's both our greatest strength and our deepest weakness. But now, first, wherever you're listening, in your kitchen, in your car, or maybe settled into your favorite armchair, do an old woman a favor. Go ahead and like this, or leave a little comment below, just so I know I'm not talking to myself on this journey. Your support means the world. Now, let me tell you about my trip to California. 3 years. For 3 years, the only way I spoke to my son was through Christmas cards that were never answered. I'd write them at my small kitchen table, the late afternoon sun slanting across the worn linoleum, and pour my heart out. I told him about the church bake sale, about the leaky faucet I'd finally fixed myself after watching a video on the computer at the library, about how much I missed the sound of his laugh. I'd seal the envelopes and send them off into the void, a little paper boat of hope set adrift on an ocean of silence. This house, ever since my husband Robert passed, seemed to have fallen silent right along with him. The silence was the loudest thing in it. It was in the empty chair across from me at dinner, and the second pillow on the bed that no longer held the imprint of a head. It was a silence that echoed with the ghosts of conversations, a silence that had weight and texture. Sometimes I would speak to Robert's empty armchair, just to hear a voice. The old grandfather clock he used to wind every Sunday night would tick away the seconds, each one a small, sharp reminder of the emptiness. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, the old rotary phone on the kitchen wall let out a shrill, startling ring. It was so unexpected I dropped the dish towel I was holding. I almost never got calls anymore, just the occasional telemarketer. I picked up the heavy Bakelite receiver, my hand hesitating. "Hello?" "Mom?" The voice was thin, tinny, warped by the thousands of miles of wire between us, but I knew it instantly. It was Milton. A jolt went through me, so strong I had to brace myself against the cool kitchen wall. My breath caught in my throat, a flood of emotions, a geyser of shock, anger, hurt, and beneath it all, a stubborn, unkillable hope welled up inside me. His voice on the other end of the line sounded different, hesitant, almost remorseful. He stumbled through a small talk, asking about the weather back home, his words clumsy and unfamiliar. He was bragging about a new house in California, about a business that was finally taking off. And then he said it. The words I'd been praying to hear for 1,000 lonely nights. "Mom, come have dinner with us. We need to talk." My heart just stopped. Every bit of hurt, all the loneliness I'd felt from being ignored for 3 long years, it all just melted away like snow in the spring. All I could hear was that word, Mom. He hadn't called me that in so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be a mother. I said yes instantly, without a single thought, the word tumbling out of me before I could even consider the silence, the unanswered cards, the years of pain. A mother's love is a strange and powerful thing. It can forgive a lifetime of hurt for a single invitation. I spent the entire next day in a flurry of hopeful preparation. I climbed the rickety attic ladder, the familiar groan of the wood under my feet, and pulled the old hard-shell suitcase down, the one Robert and I used on our honeymoon to Niagara Falls so many years ago. I ran a damp cloth over its dusty surface, wiping away the thick gray layer of neglect that had settled on it like a shroud. In my bedroom, I carefully ironed my best sweater, a soft blue one Robert had always said brought out the color of my eyes. In the kitchen, I pulled out my old mixing bowls and baked a batch of peanut butter cookies, the same kind Milton used to devour after school when he was a boy, leaving a trail of crumbs across the floor. I still remembered the recipe by heart. I packed them carefully in an old tin box, the lid worn smooth with use. The warm, sweet smell of butter and sugar filled my small kitchen, a blessed relief from the usual scent of dust and solitude. It was the scent of memory, of warmer, happier days, when the silence wasn't so loud. I looked around my little house. It was simple, I know that. The financial crash back in '08 had been a thief in the night, taking almost everything Robert and I had saved up over a lifetime of working at the textile mill. This house, paid for with 40 years of sweat and careful budgeting, was all I had left. It was more than just wood and shingles. It was my independence, my history, the container for my entire life. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was only thinking about what I was about to get back. I tucked an old photograph of Milton into the side pocket of the suitcase. In it, he was just a boy, maybe 10 years old, with a wide, unperitay, gap-toothed grin, holding up a little league trophy, his face shining with a pure, uncomplicated pride. I was hoping, praying, that I would see that smile again. Robert's old Buick started up with a familiar, comforting rumble. He'd taken such good care of it. It was a good car, dependable. I drove for 2 days straight, my world shrinking to the width of the highway in front of me. I watched the green hills of home flatten into the plains, then rise again into the vast, sun-scorched deserts of Arizona and Nevada. The landscape outside my window just kept rolling by, mile after empty mile, like all the years that had passed. The sheer emptiness of it all should have made me feel lonely, but my heart was too full of hope. My mind drifted back, pulled by the hypnotic rhythm of the road. I remembered a winter when Milton was very small, maybe 6. He'd come down with a terrible fever, the kind that makes a child listless and burning hot to the touch. The doctor said it was just the flu, but I was terrified. For 2 nights I didn't sleep. I sat in a rocking chair by his bed, bathing his forehead with a cool cloth, whispering stories, singing the same lullaby over and over. I remember the feeling of his small, hot hand in mine, and a fierce, protective love so strong it felt like a physical force in the room. I would have fought a bear for him then. I also remembered a time, he couldn't have been more than 8, when he came home from playing in the woods with a huge L-shaped tear in his favorite shirt. He was crying, sure I was going to be furious, but I didn't scold him. I sat him down at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, and I threaded a needle. Patiently, I showed him how to make the tiny, careful stitches, how to bring the 2 edges of the fabric together so the seam was almost invisible. I showed him how to anchor the thread with a strong knot so it wouldn't unravel. Taking care of what you have is more important than just buying something new, honey, I told him, my hand guiding his. Things get torn. People get hurt. Mending is part of life. It was a lesson my own life had taught me, a lesson about cherishing things, about mending. And as I drove across that endless desert, those memories were my companions. They gave me so much hope. Maybe that's what this was. Maybe Milton had finally learned that lesson. Maybe, after all this time, he wanted to mend the torn fabric of our relationship. That hope, it warmed me more than the fierce western sun beating down on the car. I finally found the address he'd given me. It was one of those neighborhoods you see in magazines, all curving streets and impossibly green lawns that must have cost a fortune in water bills. The houses were enormous, set far back from the street like private palaces. His house was the biggest one on the block, a stark white mansion with a heavy, black iron gate that looked like it belonged on a fortress. But something felt wrong. The air was too still. The gate was closed, and there were no cars in the long, curved driveway. I pushed the button for the buzzer, hearing the electronic chime echo somewhere inside. Once, twice, the only answer was silence. A cold knot of unease started to form in the pit of my stomach, a familiar feeling I had pushed down for the last 2 days. I walked around the side of the property, my sensible shoes crunching on the pristine gravel path that led to the back. There was a swimming pool, its surface a sheet of perfect, undisturbed blue, and a large glass sliding door. I cupped my hands around my eyes and peered inside. The living room was completely empty of people, but not of objects. A heavy wooden dining chair was lying on its side, one of its thick legs snapped clean in two, the raw, splintered wood exposed. And on the wall behind it, there was a deep, ugly dent in the drywall, a crater, exactly the kind of mark that would be made if someone had been shoved hard against it. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This didn't feel like a reconciliation. This felt like the aftermath of a storm. "Are you Milton's mother?" The voice was old and cracked, and it came from the yard next door. I turned to see an elderly man, his hair a shock of white, looking at me over the meticulously trimmed hedge with worried eyes. He introduced himself as Larry. He shuffled closer to the fence, his bathrobe flapping in the slight breeze, and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "I shouldn't be saying this. I really shouldn't. But you need to leave. You need to get in your car and go, right now, while you still can." I just stared at him, stunned, the words not making sense. What do you mean?" He hesitated, glancing nervously back at the big, silent house. His voice trembled when he spoke again. "Your son and his wife. They're poison. I saw them. I saw them hitting her father right there in that backyard, just a few weeks before he passed. He was an old man like me. I was too scared to call the police then. I didn't want any trouble." He looked right at me, his eyes pleading, filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "Please, ma'am, go. This is not a safe place for you." His words were like a bucket of ice water poured over the warm embers of my hope. Poison? Hitting my son? No, it couldn't be. My mind was reeling, a carousel of confusion and denial. One part of me, the sensible part, was screaming at me to listen to him, to get back in my Buick and drive until California was just a bad dream in my rearview mirror. But the other part, the mother part, the part that remembered a little boy with a torn shirt and a burning fever, just couldn't accept it. My Milton, the little boy I taught to be gentle, to mend things, how could he be capable of something so monstrous? Larry must be mistaken. He was an old man, Maybe he was confused, or maybe there was an explanation, something I didn't understand. I couldn't leave, not without seeing my son, not without hearing it from his own lips. I thanked Larry for his concern, but my mind was made up. I was staying. I had to face the truth, whatever it turned out to be. I walked back to the front of the house, sat down on the cold concrete of the porch steps, and I waited. I waited for the son I loved and for the monster I didn't know. The sky was turning a bruised purple when a sleek black car finally turned into the driveway. Milton got out of the driver's side, and a tall blonde woman emerged from the other. Flossie. She was thin in that expensive way, wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. The moment she saw me, her face split into a brilliant practiced smile and she strode towards me, her arms outstretched. "Mother Lily, it's so wonderful to finally meet you," she chirped, her voice as sweet and cloying as cheap perfume. She pulled me into a hug, a tight, almost suffocating embrace that smelled of lilies and hairspray. As she pulled back, the loose sleeve of her dress slid up her arm just an inch, and I saw them. A constellation of bruises, old and new, a sickening rainbow of purple, blue, and faded yellow, blooming on the pale skin of her bicep. She caught my glance and quickly, smoothly, tugged the sleeve back down. The smile never left her face, but for a split second, her eyes were as cold and hard as river stones. A shiver went through me. Larry wasn't mistaken. The violence was real. It lived in this house. Milton walked over, looking thinner and more sallow than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting," he said, his voice still thick with that practiced remorse. "I've missed you." Those words should have felt like a warm blanket, but after seeing the marks on Flossie's arm, they just sounded hollow and false. He reached for my arm to help me up. "Let me help you inside." But when his hand closed around my elbow, the grip wasn't gentle. His fingers dug into the soft part of my arm, hard and unforgiving, like a vice. It wasn't a gesture of assistance. It was a gesture of control, a silent warning. I tried not to flinch, just let him guide me through the ridiculously large front door. The contrast between his loving words and his bruising touch was a terrifying dissonance. I understood then that every word, every touch from him, was now a potential threat. The inside of the house was cavernous and cold. It was filled with expensive modern furniture that looked like it had been chosen from a catalog, not collected over a lifetime. It had none of the warmth of a home. Flossie led me towards the kitchen. "You just sit and relax, Mom. I've made a special dinner." The rich aroma of roasting meat coming from the oven was inviting. It truly was. But there was another smell underneath it, a sharp chemical odor that fought with the scent of the food. Bleach. A lot of it. I've kept a house my entire life. I know the smell of bleach for regular cleaning, and I know the smell of bleach that's being used to hide something. Flossie seemed to notice my silence. "Oh, forgive the smell," she said with a little laugh, her smile still perfectly in place. "I'm so clumsy. I spilled a bit of red wine on the floor and had to give it a good scrub." But as my eyes scanned the gleaming hardwood, I could just make it out. A faint dark stain near the base of the refrigerator, a spot that had been scrubbed raw but still held a shadow. It wasn't the shape of a spill. Could you be a dear and grab a few plates from that cabinet for me? Flossie asked, pointing to a tall cupboard. I wanted to do something normal, something to steady my nerves, so I agreed. I pulled open the heavy oak door. Inside, stacks of pristine white porcelain plates were neatly arranged. As I reached for them, my eyes caught something else, tucked away in the deepest corner, hidden behind the tallest stack. A black stun gun. It lay there, squat and menacing. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about hitting anymore. This was premeditated. They had weapons. Any last shred of doubt I had evaporated. I wasn't here to mend anything. I had walked into a carefully laid trap. I forced my hands to remain steady as I took out 3 plates and closed the cabinet door, hiding the ugly truth back in the darkness. We sat at the enormous dining table. Milton poured wine, Flossie served the food. It looked, for all the world, like a perfect family dinner. I had propped my cane against the side of my chair, just as I always do. But at some point, when I wasn't looking, Flossie glided by and smoothly picked it up. "Oh, let me just move this out of the way for you, Mom, so you don't trip," she said, placing it against the far wall of the room, well out of my reach. It seemed like such a thoughtful gesture, but I knew what it was. She was removing my mobility, my escape. If something happened, I couldn't just get up and leave. I was now a prisoner at their table, completely dependent on the mercy of the 2 people sitting across from me, the people who hid stun guns in their kitchen cabinets. My isolation was complete. I was utterly and completely alone, in a stranger's house with people I no longer recognized. Milton raised his glass. "To reunions, Mom." He pushed a glass of deep red wine toward me. I looked at the ruby liquid, and every alarm bell in my head was screaming. I couldn't drink it. I didn't know what might be in it. "Thank you, son, but you know I can't handle anything strong," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "A little juice would be lovely, though." Milton's smile vanished. He said nothing. He just set his own glass down on the table, and then I felt it, a sharp, violent jolt that shook the entire table. While looking me straight in the eye, his face a complete blank, Milton had kicked the heavy table leg with savage force. It was an unmistakable act of aggression. He didn't need words. That single, brutal kick was a clear message. His patience was gone, and if I didn't comply, the violence wouldn't stay hidden under the table for much longer. After that kick, the air in the room grew thick and heavy, like the silence before a thunderstorm. Flossie stood up, that brittle smile plastered back on her face. "Of course, Mom. Juice it is." She went back to the kitchen. When she returned, holding a glass of apple juice, the light from the chandelier overhead caught something on her face I hadn't noticed before. A long, angry red scratch ran across her cheekbone. It was fresh, so fresh the skin around it was still puffy. It looked like it had happened just before they got home. Was that why they were late? Had there been a fight? An argument that turned physical? That scratch told me something even more terrifying. The violence in this house wasn't just one-sided. It was chaotic, unpredictable. These 2 people were capable of turning on anyone, even each other. She placed the glass of juice in front of me, the scratch on her face a silent testament to the brutality that was simmering just beneath the surface. I had to get out. I needed an excuse. Any excuse. I think I need to use the powder room," I said, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. I started to push myself up, planning to use the table for support to get to my cane. Instantly, Milton was on his feet. "Let me help you, Mom," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. He moved to my side, and as I tried to stand, his hand shot out and clamped down on my arm, holding me in my seat. His grip was paralyzing. Sit still. I'll walk you. His eyes were like ice. Every escape route was blocked. I couldn't move an inch without him. I was his prisoner. I sank back into the chair, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My simple plan had failed. I needed a better one, a smarter one. If I couldn't use my body, I would have to use my mind. I thought of the small bottle of nitroglycerin pills my doctor had prescribed for me after Robert died, for my heart. I always kept them in my purse for emergencies. An idea, a desperate, risky idea, flickered to life. It was a gamble, but it was the only one I had. I took a slow, deep breath, and then I gasped, clutching my chest with my free hand. I contorted my face in a mask of pain. I dredged up the memory of the moment the doctor told me Robert was gone, the crushing weight on my chest, and I channeled that real agony into my performance. Oh, my heart, I groaned, letting my body tremble. I allowed myself to slump down in the chair, my eyes squeezed shut, my breathing turning into shallow, ragged pants. I saw Milton and Flossie exchange a look, a flash of annoyance and confusion in their eyes. And in that moment, as I played the part of a frail old woman having a heart attack, I prayed, Lord, give me strength. Give me the wisdom to get through this night. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a focusing of my will, a way of turning my faith into an invisible shield. Damn it, not now, I heard Milton mutter under his breath. Get her into the bedroom, Flossie commanded. Milton hauled me to my feet, his roughness now disguised as the emergency assistance. He practically dragged me into a first-floor bedroom and dumped me onto the bed. Just rest, Mom. It'll be okay, he said, then quickly backed out of the room, presumably to confer with Flossie. This was it. This was my chance. I only had seconds. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for the small flip phone in my coat pocket. I didn't dare look down. Working by touch alone, my thumb found the emergency button. I knew I couldn't speak aloud. I pressed the phone to my lips, whispering as fast as I could into the tiny microphone. Help! 12 Oakwood Street. My son. Violence. I had no idea if the operator on the other end could even hear me. Just then, I heard Milton's footsteps returning down the hall. I clicked the phone off, shoved it deep under the mattress, and closed my eyes, resuming my act of gasping for breath. Milton came back into the room, but he wasn't alone this time. Flossie was behind him, and she shut the door with a soft, final click. How is she? She asked. Still can't breathe right, Milton answered. I opened my eyes just a slit. My pills! Nitroglycerin in my purse, I managed to rasp. Milton looked at me for a long, cold moment. He picked up my purse from the nightstand, but he didn't open it to look for my medicine. He just tossed it onto the floor. Then he slowly walked to the head of the bed and picked up one of the big, fluffy pillows. I don't think you'll be needing your pills, Mom, he said, and his voice was completely empty of anything I recognized. I think you just need to rest. For good. The charade was over. Their plan wasn't just about getting me to sign over my house. They were going to kill me, right here, and make it look like a heart attack. The fight for my property had just become a fight for my life. Looking at that pillow in my son's hands, I thought about the things I had spent my life building. a family, a home, a belief in simple decency. And I thought about the small things that brought me joy every day, like the geraniums on my porch back home, or the books I check out from the library time and time again. Listening to this, I have to ask you something. If there was one thing you could leave behind for your children or your grandchildren, not money or property, but one value, one lesson from your life, what would it be? Would it be kindness, resilience, faith? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might just be the strength someone else needs to hear, just like I needed all the strength in the world in that very moment. The pillow came down over my face. The scratchy fabric, smelling of newness and cheap laundry detergent, filled my nostrils. Then, darkness. My air was gone. My lungs screamed in silence. The weight of my own son, the child I had brought into this world, was pressing down, extinguishing my life. For a single, terrifying second, my body went limp. I gave up. But then, a flash of light in the darkness of my mind. It was Robert's face. It was the image of my little house, the red geraniums on the porch I watered every morning. No, I would not die here. I would not let my story end in this cold, sterile room, at the hands of the boy I had nursed through fevers and held in my arms. The will to live, that primal, powerful instinct, roared to life from some deep, forgotten place inside me. My hands, calloused and nimble from a lifetime at a sewing machine. The hands that had stitched thousands of garments, that had patiently taught a little boy how to sew a button back on his shirt. Now, they were my only weapons. I didn't have the strength to push Milton off me, but I had a seamstress's quickness. My fingernails dug into his forearms, tearing at his skin. I felt the warm slip of his blood. I scratched blindly, wildly, clawing at anything I could reach. His neck, his face, his eyes. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a cornered animal, fighting for my next breath. Milton let out a guttural roar of pain and fury, and the pressure on my face shifted, just for a second. Oh God! The prayer that escaped my lips wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a scream. My faith, the quiet thing that had sustained me through years of loneliness, now became a righteous fury. The Lord did not bring me all this way just to let me die like this. A surge of impossible strength flooded my tired body. I brought my knees up with all my might, driving them into Milton's stomach. I punched, hitting his ribs, his side, anywhere I could make contact. They were weak blows, the frantic strikes of an old woman, but they were fueled by desperation. This wasn't just physical strength. It was the strength of a betrayed mother, of a spirit that refused to be broken. I was fighting not just to live, but to reclaim my own dignity. I felt Milton's weight lessen slightly. He was clearly shocked by my resistance. But then another weight came down, Flossie. She had thrown herself across my legs, pinning them to the bed. "Hold her down!" she shrieked, her voice a venomous hiss. Now it was 2 against 1. Despair began to creep back in, cold and numbing. Flossie's hands gripped my ankles, her fingers digging in like talons. The play was over. These were 2 cold-blooded killers, and one of them had my son's face. They were working together, restraining me, assaulting me. Hope was a flickering candle about to be snuffed out. And then, just as I thought I couldn't fight for another second, I heard it. At first, it was a faint sound, far away, almost lost in the rush of blood pounding in my ears. But it grew louder. Woo, woo, woo. A siren. Was it real? Or was my oxygen-starved brain creating a final, comforting illusion? Milton and Flossie heard it too. I felt their bodies tense. The siren grew closer, louder, clearer, an avenging angel screaming through the night. That sound was the most powerful medicine in the world. It gave me one last ounce of strength, just enough to hold on for a few more seconds. The wail of the siren was deafening now, right outside the house, followed by the screech of tires on pavement. Panic flashed across Milton's face. The pillow was lifted. I gasped, sucking in a ragged, painful breath of air. He looked at Flossie, his eyes wide with fear. "How?" he stammered. That moment of hesitation was my only chance. With the last of my strength, I put everything into one final convulsive movement. I didn't push him away. I just rolled with all my might to the side. My body tumbled off the edge of the bed, crashing hard onto the cold, unforgiving floor. At that exact same instant, the sound of the front door splintering open echoed through the house like a thunderclap. I lay there, bruised and exhausted, but I was breathing. I was alive. The sound of splintering wood, the shriek of tearing metal. Then the bedroom door flew open, kicked off its hinges. It all happened so fast. Huge shapes in dark blue uniforms flooded the room. A voice boomed, "Police! Hands in the air!" For Milton and Flossie, that sound was the end. But for me, curled in a heap on the floor, it was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was more beautiful than any hymn. It was the sound of life, of a second chance. I watched heavy combat boots move swiftly across the floor, surrounding my son and my daughter-in-law. The long night of terror was finally being torn apart by the light. Red and blue lights pulsed through the window, flashing relentlessly, painting the room in chaotic strobes. They washed over faces, over furniture, turning the bedroom into a frantic, silent disco. Shadows danced wildly on the walls. In that surreal light, I saw everything with perfect clarity. The murder weapon, a simple pillow lying on the bed, my purse tossed carelessly on the floor, and the face of my son, pale and slack-jawed with shock. Those flashing lights weren't just lights. They were the light of truth, illuminating the darkest corners, exposing the ugly crime these elegant walls had tried to hide. I was no longer in the dark. I had been found. They put Milton in handcuffs. In the flashing lights, I saw his face clearly. The mask of fake remorse was gone. The cold-blooded cruelty was gone. All that was left was a pathetic, crumbling ruin of a man. He was shaking, his eyes darting around the room like a lost little boy. And in that moment, I realized the monster I had been fighting wasn't some powerful evil force. It was just a weak man, a man eaten alive by his own greed and fear. I didn't feel hatred, not then. All I felt was a profound and bottomless sadness, a pity for the rotted-out soul of the child I had once loved more than life itself. "Ma'am, are you okay?" A woman's voice, calm and kind. I turned my head. A young female police officer was kneeling beside me, her eyes filled with genuine concern. She didn't touch me right away, as if she was afraid of startling me. "An ambulance is on its way. Are you hurt anywhere?" Her hand, when she finally rested it gently on my shoulder, was so warm and steady. It was the complete opposite of Milton's bruising grip, of Flossie's claw-like fingers. In the midst of all this chaos and violence, the simple decency of a stranger felt like a miracle. Tears started to stream down my face, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. As two paramedics helped me out of the house, I saw him. Larry. He was standing on his own lawn in a bathrobe, talking to another police officer. Our eyes met across the flashing lights. He gave me a slow, solemn nod, a nod of shared understanding and relief. And I knew my whispered 911 call might not have been enough. It must have been my screams, the sounds of the struggle, that had spurred him to action. This quiet, elderly man had done the thing he had been too afraid to do before. He hadn't stayed silent. His courage, his simple act of being a good neighbor, had saved my life. There were still good people in this world. Sitting in the back of the ambulance, the paramedics began checking my injuries. The adrenaline was wearing off now, and the pain was starting to set in. A deep, throbbing ache all over my body. My head pounded, but the worst of it was in my right shoulder and arm. "Ma'am, it looks like your shoulder is dislocated," one of them said gently. A dislocated joint. Justice had arrived, but it had come at a price. A physical toll. A visible scar to remind me of this night. I looked down at my arm, already beginning to swell, and I knew that even when this healed, it would never be quite the same, just like my heart. The ride to the hospital felt like a dream. The siren wasn't screaming anymore, just a low, steady hum. They had wrapped me in a thick blanket, but a deep chill had settled into my bones. The world outside the ambulance window slid by, a blur of streetlights and passing cars. It all belonged to a normal world, a world I was no longer a part of. Just hours ago, I was a mother on her way to reconnect with her son. Now, I was a victim. A piece of evidence in a criminal investigation. The shift was too sudden, too brutal for my mind to fully grasp. I just sat there, silent, staring into nothing. At the hospital, after the doctors had done their initial examination, a police detective came to take my official statement. He was kind, patient. He asked his questions and I answered them, my voice sounding distant and flat, like it belonged to someone else. "What is your son's name? What exactly did he do? Did you see any weapons?" Every answer I gave was like another nail being hammered into the coffin of my relationship with my son. "My son, he tried to kill me with a pillow." Saying the words out loud, hearing them in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, made the reality crash down on me with its full, devastating weight. The tears came again, not of relief this time, but of a grief so deep it felt like it was tearing me in two. They had to set my shoulder. The pain was so intense, so white-hot, that I almost passed out. Afterwards, a nurse helped me to the restroom. I looked in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. My silver hair was a tangled mess, matted with sweat and flecks of dried blood. One eye was swollen shut, the skin around it a deep, ugly purple. My lips were cut, and my right arm was immobilized in a blue canvas sling. I was looking at a picture of a woman who had been broken. I had survived, yes, but I was damaged. This sling, these bruises, they were a constant physical reminder of the ultimate betrayal. I wondered if I would ever be able to look at my own reflection again without seeing this night. The physical pain would fade. They gave me pills for that. But there's no medicine for the pain that was in my heart. Sitting alone in that stark white room, I didn't feel anger. I knew the anger would come later, but right then all I felt was loss, an infinite sense of loss. The little boy named Milton, the one I had raised and loved, he was gone. He was dead. The man with his face, the man who had tried to kill me, was a stranger. I was holding a funeral inside myself, mourning a son who was still alive. It is the strangest, loneliest grief in all the world. In that moment of deepest pain, my mind drifted to the simplest things. I thought about the familiar comfort of my old Skechers, the paperback book sitting half read on my nightstand back home, the simple joy of watching my neighbor's little grandson show off a new toy. Suddenly, those small, ordinary things seemed incredibly precious. Do you ever just stop and realize that the simplest items in your life are the ones that bring you the most comfort? Maybe it's a soft armchair, a comfortable pair of walking shoes, or a good book. Share in the comments what your everyday treasure is. Sometimes, those are the things that become our life rafts. That first night in the hospital was the longest night of my life. They gave me something to help me sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pillow coming down. Every sound in the hallway that made me jump. I just lay there, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling, my left hand clutching the small silver cross I wore around my neck. It was the only thing I had left from my old world, a tangible symbol of my faith. In the darkest night of my soul, I held on to it. I wasn't praying for God to take away the pain. I was just praying for the strength to carry it, to make it to the morning. A few days later, they discharged me from the hospital, but I couldn't go home. My house was in another state, a world away. A social worker had arranged for me to stay in a temporary apartment, a place for victims of domestic violence. Leaving the hospital wasn't a relief. It was just stepping into another kind of limbo. I had nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a small bag with the few toiletries they'd given me. To be 67 years old and essentially homeless, dependent on the kindness of strangers, was a quiet, grinding assault on my dignity. I had worked hard my whole life for my independence, and now it was all gone. I was starting over from nothing. The weeks that followed were a blur of sterile offices and unfamiliar faces, detectives, public defenders, prosecutors. They were all polite, professional, but to them, my story was just another case file. The most horrific night of my life was reduced to cold legal terms: assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder. I had to tell my story over and over again until the words started to lose all meaning. I felt myself becoming invisible, not a person with a shattered heart, but a witness, a part in the vast, slow-turning machinery of justice. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The familiar handwriting on the envelope made my heart clench. It was from Milton, from the county jail. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It was a calculated, manipulative plea. He blamed everything on Flossie, claiming she had been controlling him, poisoning his mind against me. He wrote about his financial troubles, about the pressure he was under. He begged me to tell the police it was all a big misunderstanding. He was trying to make me feel guilty. That letter was crueler than the pillow had been, because it attacked the one thing he knew was my greatest weakness, my love for him. And while I was grappling with all of this, the mundane realities of the world came crashing in. The hospital bills started to arrive. Even with my Medicare, the remaining amount was staggering. My savings had been wiped out in the 2008 crash. I had no cushion left. The legal system was trying to bring me justice, but the healthcare system was pushing me toward another kind of crisis. I had survived an attempt on my life only to face the prospect of financial ruin in my old age. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of the small apartment, looking down at the empty street below, Milton's letter lying on the table beside me. Should I forgive him? Should I help him escape the consequences of what he'd done? The mother in me screamed yes, but then I looked at my arm, still in its sling. I thought of Larry's frightened eyes, of the young police officer's kindness. This wasn't just about me and Milton anymore. It was about right and wrong. It was about the truth. I held my cross in my hand and I prayed. I didn't ask for guidance. I asked for the strength to do what I already knew was right. The next morning, I called the district attorney's office. I told them about the letter. I told them I would testify. The decision didn't bring me peace, not exactly, but it brought me a sense of solidity. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing this for the truth. I was doing it for Flossie's father, who had died in silence. I was doing it for any other person who might be suffering and too afraid to speak up. And most importantly, I was doing it for me, to affirm that my life, my dignity had value, and that no one had the right to take that away. Physical therapy was a battle. Every day, I had to force my shoulder through a series of painful movements, trying to regain what I had lost. But the physical scars were nothing compared to the ones on the inside. The nightmares still came, pulling me back into that dark bedroom. A loud noise on the street would make me jump out of my skin. I became afraid of being alone, but I was also terrified of strangers getting too close. The doctor called it PTSD. I just called it the price of living. In those dark months, there was one unexpected point of light. Larry, my son's former neighbor from California. He had managed to get my number from the victim's assistance office, and he called me once a week. He never asked much about the upcoming trial or my health. He just talked. He told me about his rose garden, about his lazy cat, about a history book he was reading. Those simple, normal conversations were my lifeline to the outside world. He never treated me with pity. He just talked to me like a friend. That validation, that simple act of treating me like a whole person, was more healing than any medicine. One dreary afternoon, I turned on the television. They were showing an old rerun of the Oprah Winfrey Show. I don't remember what the topic was, but I'll never forget one thing Oprah said. She looked right at the camera and said, "Turn your wounds into wisdom." The phrase struck something deep inside me. Maybe this horrible experience didn't have to be the end of my story. Maybe I could use this pain to learn something, to become stronger, maybe even to help someone else. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Not just the hope of surviving, but the hope of truly living again. I started small. I couldn't sew anymore. My right arm was just too weak, but I could read. The local public library became my sanctuary. I also started a small garden on the windowsill of my apartment, just a few pots with herbs and a single tomato plant. The simple act of tending to something, of watching it grow each day, brought me a sense of peace I couldn't explain. It was an affirmation of life. No matter how cruel the world could be, life still wanted to grow. And so did I. One day, as I was watering my little tomato plant, the memory of teaching Milton how to sew on that button came back to me. This time, it didn't bring that sharp, stabbing pain. It was just a memory. A sad one, yes, but a distant one. I realized I couldn't erase my past. Milton was a part of my story, a part I had loved with my whole heart. Accepting that didn't mean forgiving his crime. It meant letting myself off the hook. It meant freeing myself from the burden of asking why. There was no good answer. All I could do was accept what happened and take the next step forward. Healing isn't a dramatic movie-like event. It's quiet. It's a series of small, still moments. It was the moment I sat by the window with a hot cup of tea, just feeling the warmth of the mug in my hands. It was the moment I closed my eyes and just listened to a classical piece on the radio. It was the moment I smiled at a stranger on the street and they smiled back. In those little moments, I found my strength. Not the strength to fight anymore, but the strength to simply be. To be alive and to be grateful for each new day the Lord had given me. The day I was scheduled to testify, it was raining. A cold, steady drizzle. I stood in front of the small closet in my apartment, wondering what a person wears to face their own son in court. I finally chose a simple navy blue dress and a cardigan I had knitted myself years ago. I wanted to look like myself, a regular woman, a mother, a survivor. I didn't wear any makeup. I just brushed my silver hair until it was neat. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the broken, bruised woman from the hospital anymore. I saw a woman who had walked through hell and was still standing. In the courtroom, I saw them. Milton and Flossie, dressed in drab prison jumpsuits, looked pale and thin under the fluorescent lights. Flossie stared at the floor. Milton, he glanced at me for just a second. In his eyes there was no remorse, no anger, nothing. Just a hollow emptiness. The little boy I used to sing to sleep was completely gone, without a trace. The man sitting there was a stranger, and in that moment, I knew I was done mourning him. The final cord had been cut. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I placed my left hand on the Bible and said, I do. As I took the witness stand, a strange calm washed over me. Their lawyer tried to trip me up, to suggest my memory was failing, that I was confused. But I just looked at the jury, at the faces of 12 ordinary people, and I told my story. Simply, clearly. I told them about the phone call, about the peanut butter cookies, about the bruises on Flossie's arm, and the painful grip of Milton's hand, and I told them about the pillow. My words were backed up by the evidence. They played the recording of my 911 call, and my desperate, whispered voice filled the silent courtroom. They showed the jury the photographs of my injuries. They produced the stun gun found in the kitchen cabinet. And then Larry, my brave neighbor, took the stand. He told them about his warning to me, and he provided the security camera footage of Flossie slapping her own father in the weeks before his death. Every piece of the ugly puzzle fell into place. The truth has a power all its own. At the very end, the prosecutor asked me one last question. Mrs. Harper, how do you feel about the defendant, your son? The room was silent. I took a deep breath. I don't feel hatred, I said, and my voice was steady. I feel a sorrow that has no bottom. Sorrow for a mother who loved her child unconditionally, only to have that love used as a weapon against her. No mother, no person should ever have to endure that. I wasn't speaking as a victim seeking revenge. I was speaking as a woman demanding respect for her own dignity. The jury wasn't out for very long. When they filed back in, I held my breath. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, we the jury find the defendant guilty. Each word, guilty, landed like the chime of a church bell. A tremendous weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just bowed my head, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, God." Justice had been done. A painful chapter of my life was finally closed. With help from the Victim Compensation Fund and the restitution money, I was able to rent a small apartment of my own. It wasn't as big as my old house, but it was mine. The day I got the key, I just stood in front of the door for a long time. The simple act of sliding a key into a lock, of opening a door to a space that was safe, that was entirely my own. It felt sacred. This wasn't just an apartment. It was the beginning of a new life. A life I was in charge of. A life that would no longer be defined by what had been done to me. I never went back to the old house. I had it sold. The money was enough to let me live out my years comfortably. One day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote a letter, not to Milton. I wrote it to myself. I wrote that I forgive myself for being too trusting, for not seeing the signs. I forgive myself for loving so blindly. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what the other person did. It's about freeing your own soul from the prison of bitterness. The little windowsill garden in my temporary apartment has become a real garden on my new balcony. I grow tomatoes, lettuce, and all sorts of flowers. Every morning, it's the first thing I do. I go out, I water my plants, I tend to them. Watching life push up from the soil, blossom and bear fruit, I see myself. From the ashes of an old life, a new one, beautiful and strong, can still grow. That garden is my legacy, a legacy of resilience. Remembering Oprah's words, I turned my wounds into wisdom. I started volunteering at a local center for abused elders. At first, I just helped with paperwork. But then, I started talking to the other women with stories like mine. I didn't offer advice, I just listened, and I shared my own story, not to complain, but to let them know they weren't alone. My voice, which had once whispered for help into a 911 call, was now a voice of comfort for others. One afternoon, a new woman came to the center, her eyes filled with the same fear and shame I remembered so well. I just sat down next to her quietly and offered her a cup of tea. She looked at me and asked, "Does it ever get better?" I looked back at her, and for the first time in a very, very long time, a real, genuine smile spread across my face. "It never goes back to the way it was," I told her. "It's different, but it gets good again. You are so much stronger than you think." And as I said the words to her, I knew I was also saying them to myself. My story ends here, on a balcony, with a cup of tea and a garden. My shoulder still aches when the weather turns cold, a constant reminder. But my heart is at peace. I survived, I healed, and I found a new purpose. Life isn't always fair, and sometimes the people we love can hurt us in the deepest ways. But even after the worst storm, the sun will always, always rise again. And for me, this sunset, right here, right now, is beautiful and calm. Sitting here on my balcony, watching the last light fade, I feel a sense of peace I never thought I'd have again. It reminds me that every story, even one that starts in darkness, has a sunset, a moment of quiet grace. I know how it is when we sit together, how the stories can just pour out like a stream. Today, I've shared a piece of my heart, and I hope so deeply to hear a piece of yours. You know, sometimes just a simple click on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share might seem like a small passing thing to some, but to me and to other quiet voices that need to be shared, every single one of those clicks is a little ray of light in the darkness. It's a silent way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me that we are not invisible. A simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, and it gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories. After my story was told, something changed in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to hear what was in my heart. And now that you have, I realize that what I want most is to hear what is in yours. Down below, in that comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt you weren't being heard. Tell me about a passion that others might have thought was silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the smallest, most quiet way. I will read them. I will carry them with me, because your stories, they matter. We want to build Sapphire Revenge as a community where we can share these stories from the bottom of our hearts. I know you will have your own private stories that can be hard to share with a family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and sorrows, because we all have a right to be respected and to be heard. And if you don't have a sad story like mine, please share a happy one. Tell us about a small joy you found today. Please share it with me. It will be a powerful source of motivation, helping me and all the other folks watching this to heal, to find faith, and to find strength in our lives. If you're watching this on a television, please don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I so hope to share these feelings with you. Let's build a community where we can share our truest feelings. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other, a place where no woman has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you, once again, for sitting with me. It means the world.